Welcome to Historical Legacies. Here, we dive into history's most intriguing stories, unraveling mysteries and uncovering truths from the past. Subscribe to join our journey through time's greatest moments. Spartacus, the slave who challenged Rome. Spartacus, a Thracian born into hardship, became a gladiator whose defiance would forever challenge the might of Rome. His rise from enslavement to leading a vast rebellion against one of history's greatest empires epitomizes courage, determination, and a yearning for freedom. This documentary delves into his extraordinary journey, the rebellion that shook Rome, and the enduring legacy of his fight for justice. Part 1. The Thracian origins of Spartacus. Spartacus's story begins in the rugged and untamed region of Thrace, a land rich in culture and steeped in tradition. This area, located in what is now modern-day Bulgaria, northern Greece, and Turkey, was home to a fiercely independent people. The Thracians were known for their warrior spirit, their reverence for nature, and their unique tribal systems. Spartacus was born into this environment, where survival often depended on strength, adaptability, and the ability to defend one's land. Thracian society was tribal, and loyalty to one's clan was paramount, often fostering a deep sense of community. From an early age, Spartacus would have been trained in the art of combat, learning to wield weapons and defend against neighboring tribes or external invaders. This warrior training became a critical foundation for his later successes. Thrace's proximity to the Roman Republic meant that it was often a target for Roman expansion, leading to frequent clashes between the Thracians and Roman forces. Spartacus may have fought as a soldier in the Thracian army or as a mercenary, skills that would later prove invaluable. Eventually, Spartacus's fate took a drastic turn when he was captured by Roman forces, possibly during one of these conflicts. Roman expansion during this time was relentless, and many Thracians were enslaved, seen as valuable additions to the labor and gladiatorial systems. Spartacus was sold into slavery and transported to Rome, a stark and devastating change from his free life in Thrace. The vibrant hills and forests of his homeland were replaced by the harsh reality of Roman subjugation. The Thracian origins of Spartacus played a pivotal role in shaping his identity as a leader. His early experiences instilled in him a deep resilience, a strategic mind, and a natural ability to inspire others. These traits, coupled with his warrior training, made him an exceptional figure among the thousands of slaves captured and sold during this era. The story of Spartacus would soon shift from one of despair to defiance, as his innate qualities began to emerge even in the bleakest circumstances. His Thracian roots were not just a part of his past, but a source of strength and identity that he carried with him. As a Thracian, Spartacus was deeply connected to his homeland's traditions, which valued freedom and resistance against oppression. This spirit of defiance was ingrained in him and became the driving force behind his later actions. It is also likely that his time in Thrace contributed to his ability to adapt to various environments, a skill that would be crucial in leading a rebellion. The Thracian legacy of Spartacus remains an integral part of his story, symbolizing the indomitable spirit of those who refused to bow to tyranny. The early life of Spartacus, though shrouded in mystery, offers a glimpse into the formative years of a man who would later challenge one of history's greatest empires. This chapter of his life is a testament to the enduring influence of culture, environment, and upbringing in shaping a leader who would inspire millions, even centuries after his death. Part 2. Captured and enslaved. The turning point in Spartacus's life came when he was captured by Roman forces and sold into slavery. The exact circumstances of his capture remain unclear, but it is believed that he was either taken during a battle or as part of a raid on Thrace. Transported to Rome, Spartacus was stripped of his freedom and identity, reduced to mere property in the eyes of the Romans. The life he once knew in the hills of Thrace, where he fought for his homeland, was now replaced by the brutal reality of servitude. In Rome, Spartacus's fate was to be shaped by the cruel institution of gladiatorial combat. Gladiators were often prisoners of war, criminals, or slaves, and were forced to fight in arenas for the entertainment of the Roman public. Spartacus, like so many others, was thrust into this unforgiving world, where survival depended on mastering the art of combat and enduring unspeakable hardships. He was likely sent to a gladiatorial training school known as a ludus, where men were trained to fight with weapons, stamina, and strategy. The ludus in Capua, where Spartacus would have been sent, was notorious for its harsh conditions. gladiators were often treated as little more than animals, fed only enough to keep them alive and forced to fight until they were either dead or broken. Despite the brutality of this life, Spartacus's natural skill and warrior instincts began to shine through. His years of training as a soldier in Thrace had given him a strong foundation, and he soon became one of the most skilled and respected fighters in the ludus. It was here, in the midst of this cruelty, that Spartacus's desire for freedom began to burn brightly. Rather than accepting his fate, he saw an opportunity to escape, and, as he gathered strength and allies, he prepared to lead a rebellion. The conditions in the ludus were unbearable, but they also served to fuel Spartacus's anger and determination. His anger was not just for himself but for all the other slaves, many of whom had similar stories of brutality and injustice. Spartacus's relationship with his fellow gladiators became pivotal in the early stages of the rebellion. His charisma and leadership qualities emerged as he began to rally his fellow slaves, offering them a chance at freedom they had long since lost hope of achieving. The idea of escape grew from a whisper to a roar as the gladiators realized that they could rise against their captors, challenge the Roman Empire, and create a new life for themselves. Thus, Spartacus, the gladiator, was born not out of a desire for revenge or conquest, but out of a deep yearning for liberty and justice. His transformation from a slave to a leader of rebellion began in the confines of the ludus, where he found both his purpose and the resolve to fight back against the empire that had enslaved him. His spirit would never be broken, and this would be the beginning of his legendary journey. Part 3. The Gladiatorial School in Capua. The ludus in Capua was an institution where men were trained to fight and die for the amusement of the Roman elite. It was a place where human beings were reduced to nothing more than tools for the entertainment of others. Spartacus's life in the ludus was one of relentless physical and emotional strain, a far cry from the freedom he had once known in Thrace. The gladiators lived in squalid conditions, eating meager meals, enduring cruel punishment, and constantly facing the threat of death in the arena. Despite this, Spartacus's natural leadership skills began to emerge as he rose to prominence among his fellow gladiators. His courage in battle earned him the respect of those around him, and his strategic thinking began to set him apart from the other men who fought for mere survival. Spartacus was not just a gladiator. He was a tactician, a thinker, and a man driven by an unyielding desire for freedom. The gladiatorial school, though a prison in itself, became the incubator for Spartacus's rebellion. He was surrounded by men from all walks of life, some of whom had been soldiers, others criminals, and still more who had been captured from foreign lands. These men, once broken by their circumstances, began to see in Spartacus a chance at redemption, a way to escape their grim fate. While the days in the ludus were filled with brutal training and the threat of combat, Spartacus's mind was occupied with plans for escape. His early days as a gladiator were marked by careful observation and quiet rebellion, always looking for weaknesses in the system that kept him and his fellow gladiators enslaved. Spartacus's ability to strategize, combined with his warrior instincts, set him apart as a potential leader for the growing discontent among the gladiators. His escape was not a moment of rashness but one that was carefully planned. He knew that any rebellion would need careful coordination, and so he began to form alliances with those he trusted most. With each passing day, the idea of escape grew more tangible, as Spartacus inspired his fellow gladiators to believe that they could take back their lives and challenge the empire that had enslaved them. Spartacus's time in Capua laid the groundwork for the most significant act of defiance the Roman Empire would ever face. It was here that his resolve to lead the slave rebellion crystallized, and he began to understand the power of unity and leadership. His experience in the gladiatorial school not only honed his physical prowess but sharpened his mind and spirit, preparing him for the battles to come. The world of the ludus, though a place of suffering, was the forge where Spartacus's legend began. Part 4. The Great Escape. The moment of liberation came when Spartacus and his fellow gladiators realized that their fate could no longer be accepted passively. The seeds of rebellion had been sown, and the opportunity to escape presented itself in the most unexpected of ways. On a quiet evening, a group of gladiators, including Spartacus, managed to overpower their guards, seize weapons, and break free from their chains. The escape was not simply a flight from captivity. It was the beginning of something much greater. The gladiators fought their way out of the ludus, using their training to their advantage, and quickly gained the upper hand against the Roman overseers. As the night unfolded, they freed others from their cells, armed them, and created a sense of unity among the slaves who had long been living in fear and submission. This initial escape, though small in scale, sent shockwaves through the Roman Empire. The sheer audacity of the act and the courage it took to defy such an overwhelming force marked the beginning of a larger movement. Spartacus's leadership was immediately evident as he assumed command of the escapees. With his tactical brilliance, he managed to guide the newly freed slaves toward safety and, more importantly, toward a collective purpose. His vision was clear. They were not simply running from their captors but organizing for a greater cause, the overthrow of an unjust system. As they fled from Capua, the group swelled with more runaway slaves, some of whom had been previously beaten down by the system, and now saw in Spartacus a beacon of hope. As Spartacus and his growing army of rebels moved through the Italian countryside, they gained momentum and inspiration from the very people they were fighting for. The sight of a former gladiator, once a slave and now a leader, fighting for their freedom emboldened many others to join the cause. Villages and small towns along the way either opened their doors to the rebels or were overrun by their ranks, as Spartacus's army grew exponentially. The larger the movement became, the more it signaled to Rome that this was no mere slave revolt. It was a challenge to the very foundations of the empire. The escape was a decisive moment for Spartacus and his followers. It solidified his role as the leader of a growing rebellion, as a figure who not only resisted Roman oppression but also united slaves and other oppressed peoples under a common banner of freedom. Spartacus was no longer just a gladiator. He was a symbol of resistance against tyranny. The Great Escape was not without its risks, however. Roman forces, though slow to respond at first, began to rally in an attempt to quash the rebellion before it could gain any more ground. The response from the Roman government was swift and brutal, as the empire sought to regain control and remind its subjects that defiance would not be tolerated. But Spartacus, with his deep understanding of battle tactics and his intimate knowledge of the Roman military, was ready to face whatever came next. This chapter in the story of Spartacus is defined by the courage of a few brave men who chose to fight for something larger than themselves. The Great Escape marked the start of an epic journey that would see the underdogs of Rome rise up in a way that had never been seen before. Part 5. The First Battles. The early days following the Great Escape were filled with uncertainty and anticipation as Spartacus and his growing army prepared for their first encounters with Roman forces. Though they were untrained and underprepared, their passion for freedom and their sheer numbers gave them the edge over the scattered Roman soldiers sent to subdue them. Spartacus, with his tactical acumen, knew that the key to victory lay in exploiting the weaknesses of the Roman forces. Their first significant battle came at the foot of Mount Vesuvius, where the rebels took a stand against the Roman forces that sought to destroy them. The Romans underestimated the resilience of the slave army, thinking they would easily be crushed under the weight of Roman military might. But Spartacus had a different plan. He and his men used the terrain to their advantage, taking advantage of their knowledge of the land and their guerrilla warfare tactics to inflict damage on the Romans. The battle was not just a physical confrontation, it was a psychological one, as the slaves demonstrated that they were more than mere tools to be controlled. In the aftermath of the victory, the morale of Spartacus's army soared. His troops, once terrified and broken, began to believe in the cause and in the possibility of achieving freedom. The slaves were no longer just fleeing. They were now actively fighting for their lives and their liberty. Word of their success spread quickly, and soon, even more slaves and oppressed peoples from all over Italy began to join the cause. Spartacus had become a symbol of hope for those who had been crushed by the Roman system. However, the Roman response was swift. The Senate quickly realized the magnitude of the threat and dispatched more experienced and formidable generals to crush the rebellion. The first wave of Roman troops that faced Spartacus was only the beginning of a series of battles that would define the course of the rebellion. Spartacus's strategy, however, would continue to challenge the Roman legions in ways they were unprepared for. The first battles were crucial not only for the immediate survival of the rebellion but for the shaping of Spartacus's army into a formidable force. These battles proved that a well-led, motivated group, fighting for a cause they truly believed in, could take on the most powerful military force in the world. Spartacus's reputation as a leader and tactician grew, and his army became a growing force to be reckoned with, changing the tide of the revolt. The early victories set the stage for what would become a prolonged and devastating war against the might of Rome. These initial skirmishes not only shaped the direction of the rebellion but solidified Spartacus's position as the leader of a powerful movement. The first battles of Spartacus's war were not just about military success. They were about the transformation of his army from a band of runaway slaves into a force capable of standing up to the empire itself. Part 6. The slave army expands. As Spartacus's army gained momentum and tasted victory, more and more individuals from across Italy began to rally to his cause. Initially, many of the new recruits were former slaves who had escaped their masters, but as word of the rebellion spread, people from all walks of life joined the ranks. The oppressive Roman system had created a vast underclass, and as the slaves saw the growing number of rebels who fought for freedom, they too were inspired to take up arms. Spartacus's ability to unite such a diverse group was remarkable. He forged a powerful coalition out of individuals who had once been enemies or strangers, bound together by their shared desire to be free from the yoke of Roman rule. The swelling ranks of his army turned his rebellion into a movement that threatened the very foundations of Roman society. The slave army, which had once been composed of a few hundred gladiators and slaves, now numbered in the tens of thousands. The increase in numbers gave the rebellion the strength it needed to push further into Roman-controlled territories. Villages, farms, and even some cities along the way joined the movement, as people began to see that the impossible was within reach. Spartacus's army became a symbol of resistance, and the Roman Empire was forced to reckon with the threat of a mass uprising. The growth of Spartacus's army was not without challenges, however. The influx of new recruits brought with it issues of organization, discipline, and leadership. Spartacus had to contend with the difficulty of maintaining control over such a large and diverse group. There were varying levels of combat experience, and many of the new recruits lacked the discipline and training that the original gladiators had acquired. Spartacus relied heavily on his trusted commanders and fellow gladiators to help manage the growing army and ensure that their collective purpose remained intact. Yet despite these challenges, the expanding army was a force to be reckoned with. The sheer size of Spartacus's forces sent fear through the Roman elite, who were unaccustomed to seeing so many people rise against them. The slave army's expansion was a testament to the power of collective will, and it forced the Roman Empire to shift its focus, sending even more legions to quash the rebellion. As the rebellion grew, so too did the legend of Spartacus, who had gone from being a captured gladiator to a leader of an unstoppable army. His army of slaves and former slaves was not just fighting for freedom. They were fighting for a future free from oppression, for the opportunity to live their lives on their own terms. The slave army had become a beacon of hope for those who had long been silenced by Rome. Part 7. Strategic Brilliance in Battle. Spartacus's ability to outmaneuver and outthink his opponents defined his military brilliance. From the earliest clashes with Roman forces, Spartacus demonstrated a keen understanding of strategy, tactics, and adaptability, turning his rebel army into a formidable force. His unique approach to warfare was shaped by his background as both a gladiator and a Thracian warrior, granting him the knowledge and instincts to exploit Roman weaknesses. Rather than engaging the Romans in direct, conventional battles, Spartacus used hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and deception to neutralize the advantages of the heavily armed and disciplined legions. His forces moved swiftly, taking full advantage of the terrain to stage surprise attacks and retreats. This guerrilla-style warfare frustrated Roman commanders, who were unprepared for an enemy that refused to play by their rules. Spartacus was particularly skilled at identifying and utilizing natural barriers like mountains, rivers, and dense forests to shield his army and outflank his opponents. One of Spartacus's most famous victories was at the Battle of Mount Vesuvius. Facing Roman forces led by Claudius Glaber, Spartacus devised a daring plan to escape an apparent trap. With his army cornered on the volcanic slopes of Vesuvius, Spartacus ordered his men to craft ropes from vines and scale down the steep cliffs under cover of darkness. This unexpected maneuver allowed his forces to encircle the unsuspecting Romans and launch a devastating counterattack. The resulting victory not only boosted the morale of his troops but also further cemented Spartacus's reputation as a tactical genius. Spartacus also excelled at maintaining discipline and cohesion within his ranks. His army was a diverse collection of people: gladiators, slaves, and freedmen from various regions, each with unique skills and backgrounds. Despite these differences, Spartacus fostered unity by emphasizing the shared goal of freedom and justice. He treated his followers with respect and fairness, earning their unwavering loyalty. His ability to inspire hope and determination among his troops was as critical to his success as his battlefield strategies. However, Spartacus's brilliance extended beyond immediate tactics. He demonstrated a remarkable ability to anticipate Roman moves and counter their plans. He frequently employed feints and misdirection, tricking Roman forces into believing his army was weaker or positioned elsewhere. These strategies allowed him to avoid major confrontations when necessary and to strike decisively when the conditions were in his favor. Despite his successes, Spartacus remained acutely aware of the challenges he faced. The Roman Senate, alarmed by the scale and persistence of the rebellion, began deploying more experienced generals and larger armies to crush the uprising. Spartacus knew that his forces, though growing in number, were still no match for Rome's vast resources. Yet he never underestimated the power of adaptability, unity, and the element of surprise. The legacy of Spartacus's strategic brilliance lies not only in his victories but in the lessons he imparted about the power of resilience and ingenuity. His ability to turn an unlikely coalition of the oppressed into a disciplined and effective fighting force demonstrated that even the mightiest empire could be challenged. Spartacus's strategies reshaped the course of the rebellion, allowing it to endure far longer than anyone had expected. His genius remains a testament to the power of determination, innovation, and leadership in the face of overwhelming odds. Part 8. Plans for Liberation. As the rebellion continued to grow, Spartacus began to articulate a vision that went beyond mere survival. His ultimate goal was liberation, not just for his own followers but for all those who suffered under the yoke of Roman oppression. This vision, revolutionary for its time, transformed the rebellion into more than a struggle for freedom. It became a movement for justice and equality. Spartacus believed that true liberation required more than escaping the chains of slavery. It demanded the creation of a new society where the oppressed could live without fear of exploitation. His plan began with leading his forces out of Roman territory, into lands where they could establish independent communities. For many of his followers, this meant returning to their homelands. But Spartacus also envisioned the possibility of creating new settlements where former slaves could build lives free from the dominance of Rome. The path to liberation, however, was fraught with obstacles. Spartacus's attempts to move his army northward, toward the Alps, were met with fierce resistance from the Roman legions. Despite early successes, the rebellion faced increasing pressure as Rome marshaled more troops to confront them. Spartacus's vision of escape became increasingly difficult to realize as his forces were forced to fight defensive battles to protect their position. Even within the ranks of his army, Spartacus faced challenges. Not all of his followers shared his long-term vision. Some, emboldened by their victories, argued for marching on Rome itself, believing that they could strike a decisive blow against the empire. Spartacus, however, remained cautious. He understood that an assault on Rome, with its vast resources and heavily fortified defenses, would likely lead to disaster. Instead, he focused on strategies that would maximize their chances of survival and eventual freedom. Despite these challenges, Spartacus never wavered in his commitment to the cause. His ability to maintain unity and purpose among his diverse followers was a testament to his leadership. He inspired his men with the promise of a better future, reminding them that their struggle was not just for themselves but for all those who had suffered under Roman tyranny. Spartacus's plans for liberation also carried a symbolic weight. They represented a direct challenge to the social and economic structures of Rome, which relied heavily on the institution of slavery. His rebellion highlighted the deep inequalities of Roman society and forced the empire to confront the consequences of its exploitation. While the rebellion ultimately failed to achieve its goal of liberation, Spartacus's vision left an enduring legacy. His dream of a world free from slavery inspired countless others throughout history, serving as a reminder of the power of hope and the resilience of the human spirit. Spartacus's plans for liberation remain a testament to the idea that even in the face of overwhelming odds, it is possible to envision and fight for a better future. Part 9. Turning Southward. After a series of victories, Spartacus found himself at a crossroads in his quest for freedom. His initial plan was to lead his army of enslaved people to the northern Alps, hoping to cross over into Gaul and escape Roman territory. However, as his forces grew larger and stronger, Spartacus made the pivotal decision to turn southward instead. This choice would become one of the most debated aspects of his leadership, marking a critical moment in the rebellion. The reasons behind this decision were complex and multifaceted. Spartacus's original plan to escape to the Alps was based on the hope that he could disperse his forces once they reached the mountains and send them home to their various regions. However, many of his followers were unwilling to part ways, and the growing power of the rebel army led Spartacus to reconsider his options. Despite the mounting pressure to escape Roman control, Spartacus also found himself with a loyal army that yearned to continue the fight. This shift in direction brought its own set of challenges and strategic decisions. Turning south meant moving into more dangerous territory, with hostile forces and Roman legions already stationed along the route. Spartacus and his commanders were well aware that Rome's response to the rebellion was becoming increasingly aggressive. They understood that by heading south, they would not only be moving deeper into the heart of Roman territory but also risking a direct confrontation with the full might of the Roman army. The debate among Spartacus and his followers grew intense. Some wanted to continue the journey north, while others felt that they could strike a decisive blow against Rome by turning south and attacking its Italian heartland. Spartacus himself, ever pragmatic, weighed the risks of both options but ultimately saw an opportunity in continuing the rebellion deeper into Italy. He believed that a southern route would allow his forces to gather more recruits and further weaken Roman control over the region. As the army marched southward, Spartacus's strategy became one of attrition, targeting Roman supply lines and striking where the empire was weakest. His army, now numbering tens of thousands, would raid small towns, plunder Roman estates, and continue to grow in size and strength. However, this move also began to stretch the army thin, with logistics and supplies becoming increasingly difficult to maintain as the rebellion advanced. The decision to turn south was not just a military one, but also a philosophical shift. Spartacus began to envision a broader liberation movement, one that could not just escape Roman rule but challenge its very existence. This ideal, however, carried risks, as it brought his forces closer to Rome's more heavily fortified regions and well-defended cities. Yet Spartacus, known for his boldness and tactical acumen, had already demonstrated his ability to outmaneuver Rome on several occasions. The turning point would come when the rebels approached the southern Italian cities, where Roman armies were consolidating forces to put an end to the uprising. The road ahead was becoming more treacherous, but Spartacus remained resolute in his belief that his army could endure and eventually defeat the Romans. Despite the growing obstacles, he continued to push his army forward, determined to carry the fight to the very heart of the empire. The decision to turn south would ultimately prove to be one of the defining moments in the rebellion. It showed both the audacity of Spartacus's vision and the ever-growing challenge of maintaining control over such a vast and diverse army. Part 10. The Ruthless Response of Rome. As Spartacus's army continued its march southward, the Roman Empire faced a growing crisis that demanded immediate action. The threat posed by the rebellion was now undeniable, and the Senate knew that failure to crush the revolt would undermine the empire's very foundation. Rome's traditional reliance on slave labor made it particularly vulnerable to the kinds of uprisings Spartacus had ignited. The rebellion could not be allowed to fester, for it symbolized not only a revolt against Roman power but also a potential catalyst for further slave revolts. In response, the Senate appointed Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, to take command of the Roman legions. Crassus was known for his ruthless tactics and his ambition, making him a natural choice to lead the effort against Spartacus. While Pompey the Great was also involved in Roman military operations, it was Crassus who was tasked with dealing directly with the slave army. Crassus's reputation for cruelty was well established, and he was determined to break the rebellion at all costs. The Romans began their campaign in earnest by sending reinforcements to the areas Spartacus was moving through. Crassus reorganized the legions, tightening their discipline and using fear tactics to keep his soldiers in line. He also employed the brutal practice of decimation, killing every 10th soldier in a group to maintain order and discipline among his forces. This harsh treatment ensured that the legions would fight with unyielding loyalty and determination against the rebels. In addition to military force, Crassus implemented a strategy to isolate Spartacus and his army. Roman forces began to block supply routes and reinforce key positions along the southern Italian coast to prevent the rebel army from moving freely. Crassus was methodical in his approach, creating a net around the rebels that would eventually tighten as he pursued them further into Italy. While Spartacus's army had initially outmaneuvered Roman legions with speed and surprise, Crassus's disciplined forces gradually started to gain ground. Yet despite the mounting pressure from the Romans, Spartacus did not falter. His army, though weary and stretched thin, continued to wage a fierce guerrilla campaign against Roman positions, striking when and where they could. Spartacus's leadership remained a beacon of hope for his followers, who saw in him not just a warrior but a symbol of resistance against oppression. Crassus, however, was no fool. His forces advanced on Spartacus with calculated precision, knowing that the slave army's morale would eventually start to crack under the strain. The Romans used psychological warfare as well, spreading rumors and attempting to turn members of Spartacus's army against him. One of the more divisive moments came when a portion of Spartacus's followers suggested they should march to the safety of the Alps, but Spartacus's vision of a grander rebellion kept them on course. This decision sparked internal debate and division within the ranks, but Spartacus maintained his leadership with unwavering resolve. The Romans, growing more desperate, ramped up their pursuit, tightening the noose around Spartacus and his army. At this point, it was clear that the rebellion's days were numbered unless Spartacus could deliver a final, decisive blow to the Romans. This would lead to an inevitable clash that would shape the fate of the rebellion and solidify the Romans' resolve to crush any challenge to their authority. Rome's response was ruthless, but it also marked a turning point in the rebellion. Spartacus's ability to maintain unity and inspire his followers despite the overwhelming odds was both his strength and his greatest challenge. The question now was how long he could continue to outwit and outmaneuver the relentless pursuit of the Romans. Part 11. The Final Stand at Senertia. As the forces of Spartacus were relentlessly pursued by the Romans, the situation became more desperate for the rebel army. The once formidable slave army, now battle-worn and increasingly divided, had been driven into the region near the small town of Senertia. This would become the site of their final stand, where Spartacus would face the full force of the Roman legions under Crassus's command. The stakes were high, and both sides knew that this would be a decisive battle. The rebel army had been severely weakened by months of marching, constant battles, and a lack of supplies. Desertions were on the rise, and internal conflicts began to splinter the once united force. Despite these challenges, Spartacus remained resolute in his decision to confront the Romans head-on, believing that they had no choice but to fight for their freedom. His leadership remained unwavering, and he continued to inspire those who still followed him, urging them to stand strong for the cause of liberation. The Romans, on the other hand, were closing in with a sense of purpose and determination. Crassus had brought his legions together for this final confrontation, and the sheer weight of Roman discipline and resources made them a formidable adversary. Crassus knew that this battle would either crush the rebellion or solidify his position as one of Rome's greatest generals. The slave army, by now, was exhausted and demoralized, but Spartacus's strategic mind remained sharp, planning the defense with the hope that his forces could once again outmaneuver the Roman legions. The terrain around Senertia was not ideal for either side. The rebel army had dug in, hoping to use the landscape to their advantage, but Crassus quickly adapted his strategies to neutralize the rebels' advantages. The Roman legions encircled the battlefield, cutting off any potential retreat and ensuring that the rebel forces had nowhere to escape. It was clear that this battle would be a fight to the death, with no mercy to be shown on either side. On the day of the battle, Spartacus led his forces with valor, leading charges and inspiring his men to fight as they had done in earlier skirmishes. The first waves of battle saw some success for the rebels as they managed to break through initial Roman formations, surprising Crassus's legions with their tenacity and courage. But the Romans, prepared and disciplined, eventually regained their footing, driving the rebels back with superior numbers and tactics. Spartacus's forces, worn thin and overwhelmed by Roman discipline, began to falter as the battle dragged on. The final moments of the battle were chaotic and bloody. Spartacus himself fought fiercely, refusing to surrender even as the tide of the battle turned against him. According to some accounts, Spartacus managed to break through the Roman lines briefly, but his forces were too scattered, and the Romans quickly regrouped, surrounding the rebel army from all sides. As the battle drew to its tragic conclusion, the rebels were slaughtered, and Spartacus's dream of freedom was crushed on the blood-soaked ground of Senertia. Though the battle was a defeat for Spartacus and his forces, it was not without its significance. The courage displayed by the rebel army in their final stand would resonate throughout history, inspiring generations to come. The determination of Spartacus and his men, even in the face of overwhelming odds, would become a symbol of resistance against tyranny and oppression. The fall of Spartacus at Senertia marked the end of the largest and most significant slave rebellion in Roman history. Rome had won the battle, but the legacy of Spartacus would live on as a symbol of defiance against the mighty empire. Part 12. The Death of Spartacus. As the battle at Senertia ended in devastating defeat for the rebel forces, the fate of Spartacus became a matter of both mystery and legend. With his army shattered and his forces annihilated, Spartacus's final moments are shrouded in uncertainty. While some ancient accounts suggest that Spartacus fought until the very end, dying on the battlefield surrounded by his enemies, the details of his death remain unclear. The exact circumstances of how he met his end are lost to history, but it is certain that he died during the final stages of the battle, with no escape from the crushing Roman forces. After the slaughter of the rebel army, Crassus ordered a thorough search of the battlefield for Spartacus's body. Despite the Roman legions combing through the wreckage of the battle, Spartacus's body was never definitively identified. Some sources claim that Spartacus's body was among the fallen, while others argue that he was buried in an unmarked grave, his body lost in the chaos of the battle. What is certain is that Spartacus's death marked the end of the rebellion, and his vision of freedom was extinguished on the battlefield. Crassus, having finally defeated the uprising, sought to send a brutal message to anyone who might consider challenging Roman authority again. The bodies of the rebel slaves, including those of Spartacus and his commanders, were crucified along the Appian Way, a public display of Rome's absolute power. The crucifixion stretched for miles, serving as a horrific reminder to slaves and potential rebels of the consequences of defying Rome. The suffering and death of Spartacus and his men were meant to strike fear into the hearts of the oppressed, ensuring that no one would dare challenge Rome's authority again. Yet, in the midst of this Roman victory, Spartacus's legacy began to take root. Though his body may have been lost to history, his spirit lived on as a symbol of resistance and defiance. Over the centuries, his death would become more than just the end of a rebellion. It would come to represent the undying will to fight for freedom against overwhelming odds. Spartacus's death, tragic and brutal as it was, cemented his place in history as one of the most iconic figures of resistance against oppression. In the aftermath of his death, Rome returned to its state of dominance, but the rebellion had left scars on the empire. The fear that Spartacus inspired lingered long after his death, and his name continued to be spoken in hushed tones throughout Rome. While the rebellion had failed, the story of Spartacus, the slave who dared to challenge Rome, became a legend that would inspire countless movements for freedom and justice in the centuries to come. Though his life was short and his rebellion ultimately crushed, Spartacus's fight against tyranny would resonate through history, forever preserving his legacy. The legend of Spartacus would be passed down through generations, serving as a reminder of the power of resistance, even in the face of insurmountable odds. Part 13. The Aftermath of the Rebellion. With the defeat of Spartacus and the annihilation of his army, the repercussions of the rebellion echoed throughout the Roman Empire. The slave revolt that had terrorized Rome for over 2 years had finally been crushed, but the aftermath was far from simple. The rebellion's defeat was not just the end of a military campaign. It was a warning to the empire's rulers and to the thousands of slaves who had witnessed Spartacus's leadership and courage. Rome's response was swift and brutal, ensuring that the legacy of Spartacus's uprising would never inspire another challenge to Roman authority. Crassus, having triumphed over the rebels, took immediate steps to assert Roman dominance and stamp out any remaining embers of rebellion. His decision to publicly crucify the bodies of the fallen slaves along the Appian Way was a chilling display of power and a reminder to anyone who dared consider a similar revolt. Thousands of slaves, including those who had fought under Spartacus, were killed or captured, their lives extinguished to quell the spirit of rebellion. This act of retribution sent a message to the Roman populace and to the enslaved people across the empire, that defiance against Roman rule would be met with merciless force. Rome, having secured victory over the slave uprising, saw a temporary return to stability, but the social and political ramifications of the rebellion were not so easily erased. The fear that Spartacus had instilled in the hearts of the ruling class remained deeply ingrained, and there were heightened efforts to maintain strict control over the empire's slave population. As a result, laws regulating slaves grew even harsher, with a greater emphasis on surveillance and punishment for disobedience. The image of Spartacus, once a symbol of rebellion, became a symbol of fear, reminding those who might have considered following in his footsteps of the dire consequences awaiting them. Yet, despite the crushing blow to the rebellion, Spartacus's legacy would not be so easily extinguished. The flames of resistance that he had kindled continued to burn in the hearts of those oppressed by the Roman system. Over time, Spartacus's name became synonymous with freedom and the fight against injustice, as later generations looked to him as an inspiration for their own struggles against tyranny. The image of the gladiator who had defied Rome, leading thousands to fight for their freedom, transformed from a symbol of a failed uprising to a symbol of hope and resistance. In the centuries that followed, Spartacus's rebellion would inspire various uprisings, revolts, and movements for liberation across the world. His name would become a rallying cry for the oppressed and the disenfranchised, from medieval peasant uprisings to modern struggles for social justice. Spartacus's story, though marked by tragedy and defeat, resonated across time as a testament to the unyielding human desire for freedom and dignity. The aftermath of the rebellion also left an indelible mark on Roman society. While the empire remained strong for centuries, the echoes of Spartacus's revolt served as a reminder that even the mightiest empire could be challenged by the courage and unity of those oppressed. His story would continue to be passed down through generations, from ancient Roman historians to modern storytellers, ensuring that his legacy would never be forgotten. The fall of Spartacus's rebellion was not the end of his story, but rather the beginning of a mythic legacy that would transcend time and inspire future generations to fight for freedom and justice. Part 14. Spartacus's enduring legacy. Though Spartacus's rebellion was ultimately crushed by the might of Rome, his legacy endured far beyond his death. His name became synonymous with resistance, freedom, and the unyielding desire to defy tyranny. Spartacus's story transcended time, inspiring countless movements for liberation and justice across history. From the moment of his death, his image as a courageous leader of the oppressed solidified in the collective memory of the world. His rebellion may have been defeated, but the spirit of his struggle continued to fuel the fight for freedom for generations to come. In the centuries that followed, Spartacus became a symbol for those challenging oppressive systems. His name was invoked during peasant uprisings, worker strikes, and revolutionary movements across Europe and beyond. The idea that one man, once a slave, could challenge the power of the Roman Empire inspired many who sought to overthrow their own masters, whether they were kings, tyrants, or imperial powers. Spartacus's story embodied the potential for anyone, regardless of their origins, to rise up against injustice and seek a better life. Throughout history, Spartacus has appeared as a symbol of resistance in art, literature, and popular culture. He has been depicted as a heroic figure in novels, films, and plays, where his defiance and leadership in the face of overwhelming odds continue to resonate with modern audiences. His image has often been romanticized, but the core of his legacy remains rooted in the ideals of freedom and the courage to stand against overwhelming oppression. Spartacus has become a beacon for those who fight for their rights, for their dignity, and for their freedom. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Spartacus's legacy has continued to inspire political movements and social change. During times of revolution and civil unrest, leaders have invoked Spartacus as a model of resistance. His rebellion became a rallying cry for those challenging the status quo, from labor movements to civil rights struggles, and even the fight against apartheid in South Africa. Spartacus's example showed that even in the face of defeat, a noble cause could live on and ignite the flames of future revolutions. Spartacus's enduring legacy also lies in the way he has influenced the way people think about freedom and human rights. His story challenges the conventional wisdom of those who believe in the invincibility of oppressive systems, proving that even the most powerful empires can be confronted by the strength and unity of the oppressed. The idea that a slave could lead an army and challenge the greatest military force of its time still resonates as a powerful symbol of the potential for resistance and rebellion against injustice. Beyond his legacy as a revolutionary leader, Spartacus's life and death also continue to be studied by historians and scholars. His story raises questions about the nature of power, the social order, and the struggle for equality. Spartacus's defiance of Roman rule highlights the humanity of the oppressed and their desire for freedom, dignity, and justice. His story forces us to confront the realities of slavery, exploitation, and the lengths to which people will go to achieve liberation. Ultimately, Spartacus's legacy is a testament to the power of the human spirit to resist tyranny, no matter how powerful or unyielding the system may seem. His courage, determination, and sacrifice have made him an eternal symbol of the fight for freedom, reminding us all that even in the face of defeat, the struggle for justice and equality is never in vain. Part 15. Spartacus in Modern Culture. Spartacus's story, though rooted in ancient history, continues to resonate deeply in modern culture. The themes of freedom, resistance, and the fight against oppression have made him a timeless symbol, one that transcends the specific historical moment in which he lived. Today, Spartacus is not only remembered as a gladiator or a leader of a failed rebellion, he has become an enduring icon of defiance against tyranny and injustice. His legacy has been immortalized in books, films, television series, and art, ensuring that his spirit remains alive in the public consciousness. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Spartacus has become a central figure in both historical discourse and popular media. One of the most famous representations of his life is the 1960 film Spartacus, directed by Stanley Kubrick and starring Kirk Douglas. This iconic film portrays Spartacus not only as a warrior but as a symbol of the struggle for freedom against the might of Rome. The film's message about standing up for what is right, no matter the odds, resonates with audiences worldwide, and it continues to be a staple of American cinema. Beyond Hollywood, Spartacus has been portrayed in various other media, including novels, plays, and television series. His story has been retold and reinterpreted through the lens of different political and cultural movements, from the 1960s civil rights struggle to contemporary debates on social justice and labor rights. Spartacus's rebellious spirit has inspired many activists, artists, and revolutionaries, providing them with a historical figure to rally around when fighting against oppression and inequality. His image, often depicted as a muscular, defiant figure, has become a symbol of the fight for human dignity and the quest for justice. In popular culture, Spartacus has also become a symbol of personal empowerment and resistance to authority. The television series Spartacus, which aired from 2010 to 2013, brought the gladiator story to a new generation of viewers. The show's stylized violence and graphic storytelling captivated audiences, while also exploring themes of freedom, rebellion, and the brutality of the Roman Empire. Spartacus's character, portrayed as a complex leader torn between personal vendetta and the broader cause of liberation, became a modern archetype of the reluctant hero who must make sacrifices for a greater good. Additionally, Spartacus's legacy has also been embraced by various revolutionary and liberation movements throughout history. His story has been cited by leaders of the oppressed across the globe, including during the anti-colonial struggles of the mid-20th century and even in modern-day protests against political oppression. Spartacus's fight for freedom against a powerful empire has inspired movements advocating for workers' rights, civil rights, and the freedom of marginalized groups. Even today, Spartacus's name is invoked in protests, demonstrations, and campaigns for justice. His image as a figure who fought to the death for his people continues to inspire individuals who refuse to accept the status quo and are determined to challenge oppressive systems. The name Spartacus represents the idea that, no matter how insurmountable the odds may seem, individuals and groups can stand together in resistance and effect meaningful change. In literature, Spartacus's influence can still be seen in the work of writers and philosophers who draw on his struggle to explore themes of freedom, equality, and social justice. His life continues to be studied in universities, with historians examining the social, political, and cultural ramifications of his rebellion. Spartacus is no longer just a historical figure. He has become a symbol of the universal desire for liberation, and his story remains relevant to the ongoing fight for human rights and dignity. Spartacus's legacy in modern culture shows us that the battle for freedom is not confined to any one time or place. His story, as it has been retold and reinterpreted over centuries, teaches us that the fight against oppression is an ongoing journey, one that requires courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering belief in the power of the people. Spartacus, the man who challenged the might of Rome, remains a symbol of resistance for all time. Thanks for tuning in to Historical Legacies. If you enjoyed this dive into history, please like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for more fascinating stories from the past.